Welcome to the Daily Gospel Breakdown. Today we're going through Mark chapter 12, breaking down the historical context, deeper themes, what it reveals about Jesus, and how it still connects to our lives today. Let's get into it. Mark 12. Mark chapter 12 begins with Jesus telling the parable of the tenants. In the story, a landowner plants a vineyard, rents it to tenants, and then sends servants to collect fruit from it. The tenants beat and kill the servants one after another. Finally, the owner sends his beloved son, believing they will respect him, but the tenants kill the son as well in hopes of taking the inheritance for themselves. To Jesus' audience, especially the religious leaders, the symbolism would have been difficult to miss. The vineyard echoes imagery from the Old Testament, especially Isaiah, where Israel is sometimes portrayed as God's vineyard. The servants represent the prophets sent throughout Israel's history, many of whom were rejected or persecuted. The son clearly points toward Jesus himself. The parable becomes both a warning and a prophecy about the rejection of God's messengers and ultimately the rejection of the Son. The religious leaders realize Jesus is speaking about them, and from this point forward, the tension surrounding him continues escalating. Throughout Mark, the conflict is becoming less about misunderstanding and more about hardened opposition toward Jesus' authority. The next section involves a political trap about paying taxes to Caesar. Opponents ask Jesus whether it is lawful to pay taxes to Rome, hoping to trap him either politically or religiously. If he rejects the tax, he could appear rebellious toward Rome. If he supports it, many Jews might see him as siding with their oppressors. Jesus responds by asking for a denarius and asking whose image is on the coin. When they answer Caesar, he says, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." The statement is remarkably balanced. Jesus avoids the trap while also shifting the deeper focus toward God's ultimate authority over human life. Many Christians throughout history have seen this as establishing a distinction between earthly government and ultimate spiritual allegiance. Next, the Sadducees question Jesus about the resurrection. The Sadducees were a priestly group who did not believe in resurrection, angels, or much of the supernatural beyond the Torah itself. They present a hypothetical scenario involving a woman who marries multiple brothers under levirate marriage laws and ask whose wife she would be in the resurrection. Jesus responds by saying they misunderstand both the scriptures and the power of God. He explains that resurrection life is not merely a continuation of earthly marriage structures. He then points to God describing himself to Moses as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, arguing that God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Once again, Jesus demonstrates both wisdom and authority while exposing the limitations of his opponent's understanding. One of the scribes then asks Jesus which commandment is the greatest. Jesus responds with what is often called the Shema from Deuteronomy. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." He says the greatest commandment is to love God with all one's heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second is to love one's neighbor as oneself. This answer is significant because Jesus summarizes the entire heart of the law not as empty ritual, political power, or outward appearance, but as wholehearted love directed toward both God and other people. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus repeatedly redirects attention away from superficial religion and back toward the deeper condition of the heart. Jesus then asks a question of his own regarding the Messiah being called both David's son and David's Lord. The point is not simply genealogy, but identity. Jesus hints that the Messiah is greater than a merely political descendant of David. Mark continues building toward the deeper revelation of who Jesus truly is. The chapter closes with Jesus warning about certain scribes who enjoy public recognition, status, and outward displays of holiness while exploiting vulnerable people. Immediately afterward, Jesus observes a poor widow placing 2 small coins into the temple treasury. While wealthy people contribute large amounts, Jesus says the widow gave more than all the others because she gave out of poverty and offered all she had. This ending powerfully reinforces one of Mark's recurring themes. God sees differently than people do. Human beings often focus on outward appearance, status, wealth, and recognition, but God sees the heart, sacrifice, humility, and sincerity behind actions. Mark 12 repeatedly contrasts pride with humility, outward religion with genuine devotion, political power with God's kingdom, and surface level understanding with true spiritual wisdom. The chapter ultimately points people back toward wholehearted love for God, humility before Him, and recognizing the authority and identity of Jesus Himself. Thanks for joining me for today's Daily Gospel Breakdown. If this study helped you better understand the chapter or gave you something meaningful to reflect on, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. I plan on continuing through the Gospel of Mark chapter by chapter, one day at a time. I'd also love to hear your thoughts and interpretations in the comments. See you in the next study.